A very good afternoon to all. Welcome to Tally CA Connect. Our today's topic of discussion was suggested by our expert and Tally evangelist CA Kunal Soni. In the importance of clause 43B, Kunalji suggested that this would be a very helpful topic to discuss at this forum. CA Kunal Soni is a practicing chartered accountant. His main domain of work includes advisory on system implementation through Tally based on companies' requirements. Apart from this, he has been into corporate advisory for financial restructuring, restructuring, import export advisory on various incentive schemes of government and various government subsidies. Other than that, he is a passionate trainer. He has taken 100 plus corporate trainings, and here he being here from his very busy schedule is a very fortunate thing for us. Thank you, Kunalji. Welcome to you, and requesting to all that please put your questions in Q&A only so that Kunalji can keep a track and make sure that all the queries are answered. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Komalji, for the introduction, and thank you, Tally Solutions, for conducting the session. And very good afternoon to one and all present. So, see, first of all, now directly coming to the topic, that why choosing this particular thing, clause 43B, and what's the relevance of the same. So, as we all might be knowing that there had been an amendment in the Income Tax Act with regards to the same regarding the payments to MSME. Now, what is the trigger point, how it would impact the industries? And so basically what our purpose is, that initially we would be discussing on the theoretical aspects, that what the provision explains, that what exactly it is and how it would impact overall industry as a whole. Post that, we would have a glance into the Tally, that how we could generate the reports with regards to the same, how we would be able to have the reporting of the same through Tally. And one more thing, if any of you have any sort of questions, you can just directly ask here, and you do even can interrupt me in the between. So
Kunalji, actually interrupting will not be possible because of the huge audience, and this is a webinar. So you can keep a Q&A format open so that as and when the query comes relating to what you're talking, we can take it instantly.
So basic agenda, clause 43B. Now, see, if we consider MSME as a whole, the government itself is trying to focus on this particular thing. MSME, be it be the MSME Samadhan scheme, or be it be something relating to providing the incentives to MSME, or it is something which is in relevance to expanding the definition of MSME, trying to inculcate more and more person in the same. So what's the reason for the same, and why government is trying to do all such sort of things? Now, see, there are various things, just to brief, that what are the basic, I would say, the benefits that are available for MSME registration. Now, first thing is, see, there are various state and central government subsidies, which if you are a registered MSME, you could avail the same. Apart from that, the other thing is something that is with relevance to receipt of the payments. So you being an MSME, let's say you have provided any sort of goods or services to any particular person. If the particular person doesn't pay you within the specified time limit, which is maximum 45 days as of now, then you could charge a rate of interest equivalent to 3% of the rate notified by RBI. So this is something, see, if we consider the overall scenario in industry, generally people are not much aware regarding the same, and they are not even charging the same. But these are many of the basic benefits that have been provided. So it is better that we have an awareness as to the same. And now the new clause that has been introduced, that is with relevance to 43BH. So what exactly it is, how it would impact industry, what all things needs to be taken care of, being a CA, what we can guide to our clients. So we would be discussing on all those things. Okay, and there are certain questions right now, whether it is mandatory to obtain vendor Udyam registration certificate for 43B. So see, basically I would say, I would just initiate with the topic, and I would say that all these queries would be resolved. So going with the same, first thing is, what is section 43B of the Income Tax Act? So section 43B of the Income Tax Act it deals with certain deductions which would be allowed only on the actual payment basis. So only if you are doing the payment of that particular thing, then only you would be allowed with the deduction. Now, with the previous Finance Act, what they bought into is they added one more clause, that is clause H in section 43B. So what it provides for? So it provides that any sum payable by necessity to a micro or small enterprise. Now see again, the point to be highlighted is MSME includes micro, small, as well as the medium enterprises. However, this particular clause that is there, clause H, that is applicable only for the micro and the small enterprise. We would further go into the definition of what is micro and what is small. That also we would look into the same. But it is not that to all the MSME this particular provision is applicable. So first thing is it is applicable only to the micro and small enterprises, and which is beyond the time limit specified under section 50 of the MSME Act. So there is a specific time limit that has been mentioned, and which as of now is a period of 45 days. If you have been entered into a written agreement with that particular person, and in case you have not entered in any particular agreement, then that particular time period is 15 days. So we would even go into the same, that what is the time limit, what are the definition of micro, small, and all those things. But the only crux here to explain is that if there is a registered MSME, which is a micro or small, to whom you have not made payment as provided within the time limit provided under section 15, then in that particular case, the deduction would be allowed only in the year in which it is actually paid by the assessee. So now coming further into the same, when discussing about clause 43B, see many of the things how the provisos, there is a proviso rather below the same which provides that even if the payment is made on or before the due date of section 139(1), then in that particular case the deductions are allowed. However, when discussing about 43BH, this particular proviso specifically excluded this particular clause. So 43BH is excluded from that proviso. What it means that even if you have made the payment well before the due date of furnishing the ITR, then in that particular case also the deduction won't be allowed to you. It is allowed only in the year in which it is actually paid post that. So this is something that requires to be taken care of. Now the synopsis of the provisions are that it is applicable from 1st April 2024. It is applicable for micro and small enterprises. It is not applicable for the medium enterprises. Even if the payment is made on or before the due date under section filing of return under section 139(1), then in that particular case also it won't be allowed. And what is the time limit? So for the time limit, to understand in a basic terminology, it is something that if there is a written documented agreement, see it is very important that it is written agreement. Now if tomorrow if we say that there was an oral agreement or a deemed agreement, then that particular thing won't be valid. So if there is a written agreement, then in that particular case the time limit for the payment would be the 45 days. And in case there are no agreement, then in that particular case the time limit is 15 days. Now coming to the definition of the same. So what is a micro, what is a small, and what is a medium enterprise? When discussing about MSME, so MSME is basically you could consider a consolidation of micro, small, and medium enterprises, which its name resembles. Now there has been a specific limits that has been provided. Previously the limits were something else. Now even those limits have been amended by the government. So what government is trying to do is they are trying to cater more and more enterprises into the same, so that everyone gets the benefit of the same. The way the quantum of the business is increasing, it was required to update the limits of the same, which government has did previously. So discussing about the micro enterprises, what are the micro enterprises? Micro enterprises are the one in which the limit of investment in plant and machinery is up to 1 CR and the turnover is up to 5 CR. So if both those things are simultaneously satisfied, then in that particular case, it would be micro enterprise. Now here again, it is not an either or condition. It is and. So investment in plant and machinery up to 1 CR and turnover up to 5 CR. Similarly, for small, if we consider, then the investment criteria is 10 CR, whereas the turnover criteria is 50 CR. And when discussing about the medium enterprise, then in that particular case, it is 50 CR and 250 CR for turnover and 50 CR for plant and machinery. Now, going further, this particular definition, now see, there are many more things I would say which are not clearly clarified, and all these things we would even discuss on the same. First thing is when discussing about MSME. So MSME, it is something that it is basically for the purpose of manufacturers and service providers. Basically, the manufacturers and service providers only could register under the same. However, there are certain things previously government came up with a notification for the same, that even the wholesaler and the retail traders would be able to register under the MSME. Now, that was something where the intention of government was to provide with the benefit of the priority sector lending and all those things. So for the purpose of same, government came up with a circular that even the retail and wholesale traders would be included in the same. So now the scenario is as such that even the manufacturers, service providers, and even the traders are able to take the registration of the MSME. Now, first point would be whether this particular retail and wholesale traders would be considered for the purpose of 43BH. So that is one of the point which has not anywhere being mentioned specifically. So the thing would be that taking a conservative approach, currently it is something that we need to consider the same under this particular clause, and we need to comply with the same. Second is, what is the investment in plant and machinery, which particular value is to be considered. So there again, it is clearly specified that the plant and machinery, the WDV as per the Income Tax Act is to be considered for the same. So whatever is your written down value based on the previous ITR that has been filed, based on the same, MSME portal would update by itself that under which particular criteria you fall. So whatever the limits as of now that has been provided, that is investment in plant and machinery up to 1 CR, 10 CR or 50 CR, these are the WDV as per the Income Tax Act, which has been latestly filed by you in your ITR for the fixed assets. And fixed assets, that is again basically the block of plant and machinery only. It is not the overall fixed asset, only the particular block of plant and machinery. And third thing is when discussing about the turnover, then in case of turnover, again it is something that only your local turnover is to be considered. Now, even though let's say your turnover is 200 CR, which is a local, let's say inter or intrastate. However, when discussing about the exports turnover, let's say your exports turnover is 2000 CR. Then in that particular case, even though your turnover would be 2200 CR, still you would be a registered MSME, because the exports turnover is to be excluded for the purpose of consideration of the turnover limit. So these are the basic points that needs to be taken care of. That is the first thing. And there are some questions, I would just go through the same. There is a question that what if I fall in different block with respect to the investment in plant and machinery and turnover. So see, this is not an and or this is not an or condition, it is an and condition. So if both the things, let's say when discussing about the micro enterprises, so in case if we consider the micro enterprises, then in that particular case, both the criteria should be satisfied. That is investment in plant and machinery up to 1 CR and turnover up to 5 CR. Now, if any one of the same exceeds, then in that particular case, you would fall into the next category. So it is mandatory that both the things are simultaneously being complied with. So in that particular case, your criteria would be updated if it falls in a different block. Then second is again both the criteria are to be considered. Then yes, both the criteria we need to check it simultaneously. It is and it is not or. If the supplier is not registered under an MSME, will the clause be applicable? So in that particular case, it won't be applicable. The supplier needs to have a valid MSME registration certificate. Now, see, there is a different point. One of the point is is that of the supplier. The other would be of that of the recipient. So for recipient, as of now, there is nothing that he is mandatorily required to have an MSME registration. Yes, but for the purpose of supplier, he is required to have this certificate. Then there is a question from when this clause is applicable. So this clause is applicable basically from the 1st of April 2024. So this would trigger your financial year 23-24. So whatever your outstanding is there in the month of March, 31st March 2024, for those things it would be specifically triggered. That also we would discuss further, but how it would work is, let's say if you would have made the payments well within the financial year 23-24 itself, then in that particular case it is okay even if the payment term has exceeded the time period of 45 days. However, whatever outstanding is there as on 31st March, that needs to be complied with, and if it is not paid within the time limit of 45 days or whatever it is, let's say 15 or 45 based on the agreement, then in that particular case that needs to be disallowed. Then there is one more question, whether it is mandatory to obtain vendor Udyam registration certificate for section 43B. So see, from recipient angle it is not required, but yes, from the supplier's perspective, if the supplier has that particular certificate of MSME registration, then only it would be applicable. Then there is again one more question, who has not obtained Udyam certificate. Yes, for that it is not applicable. Then there is one more question, that MSME Act speaks only about the time limit of 45 days, section 15. Where does the 15 days in case of no agreement come from? That again, it is from the MSME Act itself. We would discuss that further. Then 43BH is applicable to traders. So see, this again, it is nowhere clarified. However, taking a conservative approach, we would suggest that the concerned person needs to comply with the same even for the traders if they do have a valid MSME registration certificate, because currently there is no specific exclusion that has been provided for the purpose of traders. So taking a conservative approach, it is advisable right now to comply with the same till the time there is any sort of clarity. I would take these questions further also. I suppose there are too many questions that are coming. I would just continue with the further slides. So now discussing about the terms of payment. So see, MSME Act, it specifically provides for that if there is a specific agreement in writing, then in that particular case, the time period for the payment would be 45 days or the actual payment terms, whichever is lower. So basically, let's say if the payment terms are decided as 10 days, then in that particular case, it should be 10 days only. It is, in that case, it is not even the 45 days. So that again needs to be taken care of. However, it is mandatory that it is something that maximum it can be 45 days. It cannot go beyond the same. So that is the first thing. If it is lower than that, then in that particular case, that lower time period needs to be complied with. And for this, it is mandatory that the agreement is in writing. However, in case there is no such agreement which is there, then in that particular case, it is 15 days from the date of acceptance or the day of deemed acceptance of any goods or services. Now, see, there are various definitions which has been provided under the MSME Act. So what is the day of acceptance? What is the appointed date? Then what is the day of deemed acceptance? We would even discuss on the same. So first is discussing about the appointed date. Appointed date means the day following immediately after the expiry of 15 days from the date of acceptance or the day of deemed acceptance. So here the time period of 15 days that we discussed is mentioned. Now, moving further, what is the day of acceptance? So it is actually the day of actual delivery of goods or services rendered. So day of acceptance is something which is whatever is the actual delivery, when the date on which the actual delivery of goods took place, or the date on which the services were rendered. Or in case there has been any sort of issues, be it be with relating to quality of goods or anything, or rate charge or anything, then in that particular case where there has been any objection, which is again, now see here the word is, it is made in writing by the buyer regarding the acceptance of such goods or services, then in that case within 15 days from the days of delivery of goods or rendering of services, and the day on which such objection has been removed by the supplier. So when in case there has been any such sort of objection, then the time period would start from the day on which that particular objection is removed. And what is the day of deemed acceptance? The day of deemed acceptance means where no objection is made in writing within a period of 15 days from the delivery of goods or rendering of services. The day of actual delivery of goods or rendering of services would be considered. So that is deemed that actual delivery of goods or services, it is considered to be an acceptance of the same. So to provide you with a synopsis of the same rather than going into all these definitions and other things, so basically it is something that if there is a clear cut written agreement, then in that particular case it would be 45 days or the actual payment terms, whichever is lower. However, if in case no agreement exists, then in that particular case 15 days from the day of acceptance or the day of deemed acceptance of goods or services. And in case if there has been any issue with regards to the goods or the services, then the day on which such objection has been removed by the supplier. So this is the basic crux with relevance to the time period of the same. So if we understand now, these are the scenarios that we have provided, that let's say if there is a written agreement for 10 days, then in that particular case payment is required to be done well within a time period of 10 days because there is a written agreement. Moving further, if there is no written agreement, if no written agreement exists, then in that particular case the payment would be required to made well within a time period of 15 days from the date of delivery of the goods or rendering of the services. If the written agreement is for a period of 50 days, then in that particular case payment would be required to be made well within a time period of 45 days, because it is the higher side the limit that has been provided of 45 days. And in case again, in case of a written agreement, if it is 45 days, then it should be 45 days. So this is the basic crux, that what are the time limits for the same. So now again, moving to Q&A. If the supplier is Mr. from Mr. Milind, I suppose, if the supplier not registered under MSME but investment and turnover limit are under the MSME, then in that particular case this clause won't be applicable because it is mandatorily required to have a valid MSME registration certificate. Then there is a question from Mr. Kulin. Both the conditions are to be fulfilled for micro or small enterprise in case if turnover of an investment. See, yes, as discussed, both needs to be simultaneously fulfilled. What if the supplier has not informed us that he is registered under MSME or not? See, basically now there is a one process which you could inculcate. I suppose most of you might be CA. So what you could suggest your client is something with relevance to the vendor registration, that when they onboard their vendor, they take a declaration with regards to e-invoicing and MSME, their basic, the GST, KYC and all those things. So it is mandatory. So at that particular time itself, they should ask them that whether you are a registered MSME or not. If yes, provide us with the certificate for the same. Because it is not only one declaration, there are certain other declarations also under the Income Tax Act for 206C, 1H and 194Q. Then there is a declaration for e-invoicing, whether it is applicable to him or not. Similarly, there is a declaration for MSME. So it is the duty of the recipient to ask his particular supplier, else in case of default, that particular recipient would be required to bear the consequences. Is any disclosure required under the Companies Act with regards to dues to MSME? So see, for Companies Act, I would say that it is specifically mentioned under the Schedule 3 that MSME creditors are required to be disclosed separately. So yes, the disclosure is required and that is specifically provided under the Schedule 3. Then there is a one more question, that investment 9 CR and turnover is 3 CR. So I suppose that, see, you could yourself evaluate the investment in plant and machinery that you are saying is 9 CR, turnover is 3 CR, then in that particular case, it would be a small enterprise. So just go through the definition and do evaluate things from your end too. If agreement is for 75 days, then 45 days would be the time limit. If investment in plant and machinery is 1 CR, turnover is 6 CR, Then again, as discussed, it is a small enterprise. The last pointer clear that trader is also an enterprise, right? So see, basically there is a notification by RBI for the same. Now RBI, what notification has been provided, that it was in line with the benefit to provide them with the priority sector lending. So for that particular thing, they allowed the traders also to register for MSME. Now, discussing specifically for 43BH, it has nowhere been mentioned that traders are to be excluded or anything. So, taking a conservative approach till the time no clarity has been provided under the Act, taking a conservative approach, it is recommended that you comply for the traders also with regards to 43BH. So, if a vendor has taken Udyam certificate, rather than checking he is a trader or manufacturer, I would suggest that taking a conservative approach, just comply with the same. It is applicable only to manufacturers. No, it is even for service providers and other. So basically, government has bought this to safeguard the interest of the small vendors, so that they doesn't face any issue with regards to blockage of funds or anything. If I sell goods to a government companies, would be applicable. So see, again, there is no exclusion, but I suppose there won't be any government company who would be having this less turnover or anything. But yes, if there is any, then in that particular case it is applicable. Whether this clause is only for corporate or all, so it is not for only corporate. Now see, Income Tax Act is not specific to any company or LLP or any specific thing. It is for the assessee includes everything. So definition of the same is much wider: individual, HUF, partnership, AOP. So it is applicable to all, nothing specific to company or anything. In general, audit fees will be paid after the completion of 6 months against the provision made. In case whether the audit fees would be disallowed. So now see, again, there is a question. This particular scenario, if we consider, you made a provision, you provided him with a bill in the month of March itself. Now actual audit, let's say it is going to be concluded by 30th September. So there is a word, that date of acceptance. When you discuss about this particular thing, that what is the day of acceptance or things. So day of actual delivery of goods or services rendered. So in that particular case, your service were not at all rendered at that particular time. So if the payment for the same is made, I would say post September, well within a period of 45 days, then that sub period would be considered from the closure of your rendering of services. So if let's say your audit is concluded in the month of June, then in that case it could be from June to 15 days or 45 days based on the agreement. If we are registered under MSME in medium category and most of the suppliers are under MSME small micro, it is applicable for us to pay. So yes, it is applicable. Now see, many of the people are not even complying with this particular provisions with regards to the payment of interest, because no one has voluntarily asked till date. When you discuss about the vendors, the payment terms are there which are exceeding the same. But that was very specific for the from the perspective of making payment of interest to the same. Now this is something that which has been in relevance with the disallowance under the Income Tax Act. So it would be required that either you make the payment well within the time limit, or you would be able to get the deduction of the same in the next financial year. This turnover and investment I already explained. So I suggest that you just evaluate from your end the turnover and investment for the categorization. Is PO to be considered? Yes. So see, for the purpose of this agreement, again, yes, any supporting written valid document would be valid for the same. If in invoice mentioned immediate payment, then will it be treated as an agreement? So immediate payment, it is something that you need to even now make on the same date itself. So agreement, again, it's a much wider term. Now this may be in, I would say it may come in litigation at a time when there are actual assessment or verification of documents, that what would be the agreement, how it would be. We have to take date of invoice or actual delivery. Now see, again, this was something which has been mentioned in the act, but considering the current scenario, date of invoice and actual delivery are more or less one and the same, because even the e-way bills are generated for the same. So when the e-way bill are generated at that particular spot of time itself, invoice are generated. So ideally it is one and the same. But if someone any manner in, except the rare scenarios, try to prove then again it would be a question at the time of assessment. So see, now again I would say that let us move on to the topic. I would just try to address the other questions later. So just providing a brief as of now for the same. Now, see, this is a scenario that we have considered as of now. These are the date of invoices. These are the days. This is in case when there is a clear-cut written agreement. This is the due date for the payment, and this is the actual date of payment. Then in that case, would deduction be allowed or not? So first scenario, let's say the date of invoice is 3rd March 2024, and the days as per agreement are 10 days. So the due date would be 13th of March 24. Payment is made on 12th March 24. So yes, deduction would be allowed in 23-24 itself. Coming to second scenario, where the due date is 13th March, but payment you made in 15th of March. So now see, in this case, it is after the due date of payment, you made the payment. But it is well within the financial year 23-24. It is made in the financial year itself. Then again, in that particular case, the deduction would be allowed in this particular case. Considering the other scenario where the date of invoice was 25th of March, due date is 4th of April, actual payment you made on 6th of April. Now in this particular case, deduction won't be allowed. Then again coming to this 25th of March, date was 4th of April, you made on 3rd of April, then in that particular case, it would be allowed. Date of invoice is 20th of March. Now in agreement, 60 days are mentioned. So actual due date comes to 19th of May. However, for MSME, it is maximum 45 days. So as per MSME, we need to make payment anyhow by 4th of this May. We made actually on 6th of May. Then in that particular case, it won't be allowed, even though it is well within the period of the actual payment terms that were mentioned. Then there is one more, that same scenario, if payment was made on 2nd of May, then in that particular case, as it is before 4th of May, it would be allowed. Let's say invoice was on 31st Jan, payment terms are 45 days. So should have been made on 3rd of March. We made it on 1st of March before the due date allowed. And in this case, we made it on 31st March. But as it is within the financial year, then payment is allowed. So make sure one thing, that any payment made well within the financial year, even though after the due date, that would be allowed as a deduction. Only point to consider is post completion of financial year, when you are making the payment, then in that particular case, you need to check whether it is within the time period specified. If not, then that particular expense would be disallowed. And here it is assumed that delivery of goods and rendering of services are same as date of invoice. And in general scenario, it would be one and the same, because generally there are very rare scenarios where as of now people would be issuing invoices in advance or other things. But however, if there are specific such scenarios, then you could take a stand that this invoice was prepared in the advance and service were rendered post that. So the payment for the delay, that the payment terms would be considered from the date of rendering of services. And now the same thing, the scenario where there are no agreements. So in case of no agreements, the due date that is within a time period of 15 days. So let's say in this case, date of invoice is 3rd of March, due date is 18th of March, date of payment is 12th of March, deduction allowed. In this case, date of payment is 25th March, as it is within the financial year, payment allowed. In this particular case, 25th of March, the due date for the payment is 9th of April. Actual date of payment is 6th of April, so deduction allowed. But in this case, it is made on 25th of April. So post the due date. So in this case, deduction won't be allowed. So see, this was the basic theory with regards to the provisions of 43BH. Again, now taking some of the questions.
Kunalji, I think in interest of time and the audience, let's cover your agenda and then we'll take up the questions.
Yeah,
Kya pata,
sure.
most of the queries will be answered itself.
Yeah.
And you also
And
have a further commitment. So yeah.
yes, sure. Now discussing about the walkthrough as to the same under the Tally. Now see, first thing is, many of you might be using Tally. Most of you, I suppose, would be aware with regards to the aging analysis, overdue report, and other things in Tally. Now, being a CA, first and foremost thing that you are supposed to do is to guide your client that what basically is necessary. That is the first thing, that is the vendor registration. Apart from that, you could have the system driven controls. Now, even I suppose that most of the clients are would be such who would be using Tally. So Tally, it has provided with a specific feature for bill to bill management, aging analysis, overdue payables receivable report. And apart from that, while maintaining the same, it even provides with an on account blocking system. Now see, that is, I would say, one of the best feature that has been provided. Generally what happens whenever user make any sort of payments, they generally just book the same as on account and just make the payment. Now because of the same, the reporting, the MIS that should be available, that is not readily available from the system. So just discussing the same, let's say when you are doing any sort of payment entries, selecting any of the party, let's say Mr. A creator. Now see here, there are various options that has been provided, whether it is advance, whether it is against reference, whether it is new reference, or it is on account. So what are the relevance of the same and how it impacts the reporting? So when taking the advance, it is something that, let's say you are making advance to your vendor, then in that particular case, you would select the advance. Against reference is something when you are making the payment against any particular invoice, then in that particular case, you would select against reference. New reference is something that is generally used at the time of purchase invoice or sales invoice, that you are mentioning the reference for the same. So that means, let's say any invoice is created, so when you are making the payment or receiving the funds, you could just track the same, that it is against the which particular invoice. Now this is something on account. What is it for? It is basically when you are not at all aware that for what purpose you are doing the payment. But when discussing regarding the manner of accounting, generally what people do is, rather than taking the burden of just seeing that which particular invoices are outstanding and providing the reference, they just directly select the on account and save the entry. Now because of the same, what happens is you don't get the proper reporting directly from the system. So it is mandatory that you block this particular option itself, and Tally has provided the same by default in the master configuration of the same. You would even see from where it is available. Now when you go to the company screen, when you go to the user roles, currently we are working in this particular company. So these are various user roles. You could create the user roles like sales, purchase, be it be the production purchase, production manager, or anything. Now when you click on the same, let's say here it is a data entry role. Now here there is a specific option that has been provided, that is exclude on account bill allocations. You can set the same to yes. When the same would be set to yes, what would happen is the user won't be getting that particular option for selection at all in the payment or receipt, so that your aging analysis, bill to bill reporting, that would be that would be available properly with proper data and with the accuracy from the system itself. So rather than further doing the things manually, system would provide you with the data by itself. Now we have just posted certain transactions, and one more thing that we have done is, let's say when going to balance sheet or anything, what I did is coming to current liabilities, sundry creditors. So what you could do is just track that which particular creditors are MSME and which are non MSME. Now see, for companies this is even useful for the purpose of reporting in schedule 3. And other than that, now with the introduction of 43BH also, it is important that you have a clear cut segregation, that which are MSME creditors and which are non MSME creditors. Further, based on the same, if you want, you could just segregate the same based on the creditors for goods or services or salary or anything. Here I did 3 further segregations, that is which are under the micro, which are under the small, or which are under the medium. Now see, this is just something that you could do it for your personal evaluation and other things, so that at the year end, when you are supposed to report the transaction or the verify the disallowance from your client's Tally data, you could just directly have it from the system itself, that out of, let's say, 200 creditors, 100 were MSME, 100 were non-MSME. And now for the purpose of disallowance under 43BH, you are just supposed to view those particular MSME creditors only. So this one is medium. Then this, if we consider, these are the micro and these are the small creditors. So see, this is just something that I created just for the purpose of personal understanding, so that if we want, we get a clear cut outstanding analysis for the same from the system itself. Now this again is specifically, I would say, a part of vendor registration. So let's say previous year has already passed. Currently new financial year is going to begin from 1st April 24. So you ask your clients now, from now itself, that have a proper vendor registration process where you collate the data with regards to their MSME registration, then their GST registration, e-invoicing applicability, TDS deduction under 194Q and other things, 206C1H. So have all those declaration right from now itself. Try them to tell them to collate the things. It would be useful for you for the purpose of audit and reporting. So this was something that we have created a group. Then we have posted certain demo transactions with regards to the same for the purchase and payments. So this is the basic purchase entry everyone of you might be aware of. I'm not going much deeper into the same, but again, what is mandatory here? Whenever you create your creator's ledger, the first thing is whether maintain bill by bill is set to yes or not. So I would suggest that, see, even from Companies Act, when discussing about the aging analysis, it is mandatory now to provide with the aging analysis. So if this particular option is set to yes, then Tally itself would provide the aging analysis from the system itself. You are not supposed to do the same manually. So do it. So maintain bill by bill, you can set the same to yes. Then there is one more option, that what is the default credit period. So for the purpose of MSME, you could just define the same, let's say 45 days or any with your particular creditors. So by default, that would be populated. In case you want to update the same manually, then in that case, you could even update the same in the system. So this is the basic check that needs to be taken care of at the time of master creation, that is set bill by bill to yes, have the default credit period mentioned. And apart from that, even if you are maintaining the books of accounts in a multi-currency, let's say you are an exporter or importer, you are making the payment in USD or you are getting in USD, then in that particular case, through this particular option, you would be able to have the accounts maintained in multi-currency, whereby the exchange gain loss would be calculated by itself. So that again is a very useful feature. Now coming to the posting of purchase entry, this all you might be aware of. And if you want to provide with the reference of the receipt note or the purchase order, even that trail you could means maintain entirely, that is from PO to receipt note to purchase invoice. Now after all these things, there would be a table which would be populated, this. So here the thing that we discussed, that what is the type of reference when entering the purchase invoice. If advance is not made, it is new reference. Then what is the name? So name, it is basically the invoice number. So here see, the supplier invoice number is 3, which has been auto populated. So by default, the supplier invoice number would be populated here, so that when you are viewing your bill by bill summary, you could get the invoice wise details. Then it is the due date or credit period. Now see, when we enter the same in the master detail, it would by default provide the same by 45 days here, which you would be able to alter the same. One more point here to be taken care of is there is an F12 feature for configuration. Now see, there is an option here, use default bill wise details for bill allocation. If the same is set to yes, then the screen that we saw previously, that won't be available. So it would by default have the allocation by itself. When it is set to no, then in that particular case only that would be populated. And there is one more option, modify all fields during the voucher entry. So if the same is set to yes, then in that particular case only you would be able to modify this particular due date. Or else what will happen, that whatever days you would have mentioned in the master, that would be auto populated. So this is something with relevance to the posting of invoice. So things that are mandatory is 3 things I would say. First is that maintain bill by bill should be set to yes. default credit period that should be provided so that the things are auto populated. Then at the time of providing the allocation for the same, the new reference or against reference, if it is in case of advance, then against reference also you could select here. So new reference and provide the due days here. So based on the same, the details would be provided in the overdue report or the aging analysis. And you could set the same, save the same. Similarly, when you make any of the payments, so now say, let's say we made this payment. So again, it is mandatory that we make the payment. See, now this pending bills list would be auto populated. Now see, that was an invoice amount of 60,000. We have already paid 50,000. So it is even displaying here that the balance 10,000 is yet payable. But when making the payment, it is mandatory that you have the same under the against reference tab and you select that particular invoice. Through that only your reporting would come proper. So this is the normal post that the data entry that you could do and save. Coming to the reporting part further. We can go to display more reports, statement of accounts, outstanding. Now see, there are here reports which are with relevance to receivable, payable, ledger or group. So one of the option is you could go it from here also. And apart from that, there is one exception report also, which provides with the overdue receivable and overdue payable report. So there also you could go. So now, as of now, going to statement of accounts, outstanding, payable. Now, see, first thing, what would happen that let's say generally the client's data are not properly splitted or proper bill-to-bill references are not provided. Now, when discussing, see, now one of the invoice that is there, that is of November 15th November 2020. However, when discussing about the disallowance, disallowance is only with relevance to the transaction that took place in the current financial year, that is financial year 23-24. So let's say if there is any old outstanding of the previous financial year which has not yet been paid, then even though the same was an MSME, then still the same is not supposed to be disallowed because that has not at all hit your PNL itself as of now. So first point that is to be taken care of is that this is for the financial year for which for means the reporting period, that is financial year 23-24. It is not for the prior years or that. And what you could do is if you want for this particular financial year only, you could just apply the filter here, the filter option that has already been provided here. Either you could use the multi filter or the advanced filter. Let's say we are using multi filter. Here we can mention that the date greater than 31st March 2023. So now see, our reporting period would be from 1st April 23 to March 24. So what we can do is we can just provide with a filter that the date should be greater than 31st March 2023. So once you save the same, see what would happen that all the previous invoices that were there in this particular outstanding list, that would go by itself. So this particular report would further provide you with the details which are only with relevance to the current financial year, that is financial year 23-24. So now the first and foremost thing that is there, that is you got the outstanding of the current financial year. Further, one more thing, let's say if you would have segregated the same under the MSME and non-MSME, then you could even provide with an advanced filter that the creditors within the group of MSME only. So in that particular case, what would happen? You would be getting the list of the MSME creditors only. And apart from that, there is one more option that if you don't want to provide for the filter of the same, you could just directly go to the group. Now see, there are groups like micro creditors, MSME, small creditors, sundry creditors. So what I can do is I can just go for the MSME creditors. So here I get the list of the same directly. And what are their relevant pending outstandings. So that is one of the thing. Now going to this particular report. Currently, let us provide with a period of April 23 to March 24. Now this is the outstanding of 15th November 20. Now this is not to be considered for the purpose of reporting. So what we would do is we would just apply with a filter for the same. Currently going with the multi filter, we can provide with the date filter that date greater than 31st March 2023. So now see all these invoices which are pending for the as on 31st March 2024 that has been displayed. Now, having a detailed view for the same. So this is the first thing. Now discussing about all these invoices. So your purchase date was 31st May 23, and the purchases amount to 1,50,000, and you made the payment for the same on 4th June 2023. Now this is made within the financial year. It is well within the due date. However, a payment amount of 20,000 is still pending as on 31st March. So as it is not paid till 31st March, this thing is to be disallowed under 43BH, amounting to 20,000 only, not the entire amount. So whatever your outstanding is there as on 31st March, that needs to be disallowed. Now, see, for this transaction, it is very, very clear. You could have the list of the same directly from this report, because the period for the payment, it is already an overdue payments which are not made till 31st March 24. So you could have the list of the same, just directly disallow as it is not paid till 31st March 24. However, when coming to the other transaction which took place near to the year end, so let's say there are 3 to 4 transactions which took place on 20th of March, again 20th March and 25th of March. Now payment for the same are not been made. Now see, there are certain due dates that have been mentioned. So when discussing about the creditor Mr. A, so here the due date for the same, let's say the due date is 45 days in this particular date. So here the due date is mentioned, that is 4th May 2024 for this particular invoice, that is invoice supplier reference number is 5. So in that particular case, you need to check with further whether the payment was made on or before 4th of May. So let's say in this case, even if the same is made on 30th of April, then in that particular case, this particular expense is to be allowed in under the financial year 23-24 at the time of computation of income. However, if the same is made on, let's say, 10th of May or 15th of May, then in that particular case, the same needs to be disallowed. So the two things that you clearly get it from here is, for all the overdue payments as on 31st March 2024, which are pertaining to the current financial year only, that is financial year 23-24, you would be getting the directly the list of disallowance under 43BH. And for the outstanding data for the near terms, let's say that is for the period of March, and where the time period of 15 days or 45 days has been expired post 31st March 24, then in that particular case, what we would be supposed to do is, we would be required to check with the same whether the payment for this particular invoices were made before that time limit or it is made post that. So discussing about this three scenario specific, let's say for Mr. B, if we discuss, then in case of Mr. B, that is there is no written agreement. So the time period that was mentioned in the invoice was 15 days. So by default we got that 20th March plus 15 days. So it is due on 4th of April. So in case if it is made, the payment is made on 3rd or 4th of April, then in that case it would be allowed. However, if the same is not made within the time period mentioned of 15 days, then in that particular case, if it is mentioned on 5th, 6th April or on May or June, then in that case, it would be disallowed. Similarly, for this case, Mr. Creditors, where the invoice date is 25th of March, considering a time period of 45 days, it turns to 9th of May. So if it is made well before 9th May, then it would be allowed or else not. So see, this is the basic reporting that would be available from the system. Again, provided proper accounting has been done through proper referencing, through proper configuration and setup. So that is the basic requirement that's there. Okay, so now I would just take some of the questions because we have a limitation of time. Okay, so there are in all 39 questions. I would just try to answer each of the same individually.
Yeah, most of which might be similar and what you
Yeah,
have covered.
I
So
would
you
just
can
try to
skip
skip the
those.
same, the one which are similar.
Yeah, exactly. You can skip those and
Yeah. So there are many vendors where the period of payment is 60 days or more, which has been agreed. So will that be revised? So see, even if your internal terms are 60 days, for the purpose of reporting under the act and the disallowance, it is a time period of 45 days only in case of agreement, and in case of no agreement, it is 15 days. So it has nothing to do with the internal terms that is there. Even if it is exceeding a time period of 45 days, it has no relevance. How to consider day of acceptance of services if the invoice is raised by them later? So in that particular case, see, services, no one has seen that services were rendered. So in that particular case, date of invoice would be deemed to be the date of acceptance, and the time period for 15 days would be from the date of invoice itself. Is this section applicable only to buyers covered under the tax audit? No, so there is no specific thing. Now see 43B, when you discuss about that particular section, it is not something that this is applicable for the assessee who are covered under the tax audit only. It is for any assessee who is assessed under the head of PGBP. So when computing under the tax under as per the computation of income under section 28, so that would, in that case it would be applicable. In case in is purchase order an agreement? So yes, if detailed terms are mentioned clearly, then that case yes, it could be treated as an agreement. MSME clause is applicable for year 31st March 24. So yes, it is applicable. Whether it needs to comply in audit report for financial, so yes, it is applicable. As already discussed, it is applicable for 23-24. Agreements include PO. It depends on the terms of the PO. Already discussed how the PO is drafted. Please share format of such declaration. I would share with the tally team. They may further forward you. They would be having your email ID. If we purchase goods on 15 March and no payment is made, will it be considered? So see, in case of 15 March, so again, it is to be considered like, let's say if there is an agreement, then 45 days it is payment term. So till 30th of April. However, if no agreement exists, then the time period would lapse on 31st March itself. So if no payment is made till 31st March, in that particular case, it would be disallowed. If we have investment, I have already discussed this. So all this investment of 3 CR, I have already shown with the definition of the same. Investment 10 CR, 2 CR, again, already discussed. What about due payments for opening balances? This I already told that, let's say if there is any opening outstanding, then that is not to be considered for the purpose of disallowance, because it is specific for the transaction that took place in a particular financial year. So the transaction which takes place in the previous year 23-24 only, that needs to be considered for the purpose of disallowance. Medium enterprise is not covered, already discussed. So for purchase done till 14th of Feb, payment should be made by 31st March 24. And for purchase between 15th Feb to 31st, they should be done in 45 days from date of invoice, even if falling in 24-25. So purchase will be allowed in 23-24. So yes, even if you are making in financial year 24-25 in the month of April or May, but it is well within a time period of 45 days or the 15 days, then in that particular case, it would be allowed. What is the relevance of appointed date? So see, basically it is governed by the same 43B. So the time period of 15 days or 45 days that needs to be considered, that is based on the same. And what is the date of rendering of the services or the delivery of goods? So it is relevant for the same. What if an asset is purchased and the payment is delayed beyond a time period of 45 days? So now see again, 45 this clause 43B, it has nowhere mentioned anything. Now asset, when discussing on the same, asset is not something which hits your PNL or anything. But in that particular case, the thing would be, when discussing about the depreciation that you would have availed on the same, that would be available in the next financial year. So that is again for this particular thing, there is no clarity. However, when discussing about the asset, it is not something that you have considered in your PNL or your profits. It is your fixed asset. But in that case, the depreciation allowance could be challenged for the same. What about the accruals made on 31st March 24? Will they be allowed as deduction? Audit fees would be accrued, but will come only by September. So will the expense be allowed? So see, once your audit is completed, and from that within the period of 15 or 45 days, if it is made, then in that case, it may be allowed. But again, the onus to prove would be on the assessee. And there is one more, whether we have to qualify audit report for not following 43BH. So see, this is with relevance to tax audit. Now, if there is a scenario where you don't at all get a details from your client that which all are the MSME creditors and which are the other creditors, then in that case, I would say you need to qualify, or you need to provide with a note in the tax audit report for the same, that the list of the MSME was not provided to you, So you are not in a position to comment on the disallowance with regards to the same. So this is again now see very specific to the tax audit report. And when discussing about the stat audit report, then for stat audit report too, there is a thing that you need to comment on the stat compliance of the same. So if you are not in a position to comment on the same, then you need to take on the your call for the same. Our most of daters have 75 days payment. So in that case, I can, yes, in that case, you could ask him. And see again, this is one clause that is for disallowance under the Income Tax Act. Apart from that, there is even a clause for 3 times the rate of interest provided by the RBI. So if you could even discuss in that terms also. If TDS is not deducted on audit fees and payment to auditor is not made within the period of 45 days, whether disallowance. So now see, when discussing about 43BH, now I would say it is what has been mentioned in the same is not withstanding anything contained in any other provisions of the act. So it already has an overriding effect with regards to the same. And again, the disallowance is going to be more in case of 43BH rather than 40AI 1A. What will be not allowed? I didn't get the question. What will be not allowed means if the payments are done post the due dates, then purchase. So when you would have booked your purchase in your PNL, so purchase you have claimed as an expense. So because of the same, your profit has been reduced. So you need to disallow your purchases to that extent if payments are not made. Whether the scenario are to be seen for 31st March ending or whole year. So whole year, I suppose if payments are made well within the financial year, then you could ignore the same. However, for the outstanding as on 31st March, you need to take with the utmost care for the same. Whether check cleared after due date would be, will it be disallowed? So now see again, when discussing about check, you have provided the check, and if it's not cleared, again I would say it can be challenged at the time of assessment, because this is not something that the person has not received the payment with regards to the same. So cannot comment anything, no clarity, but yes, that could be challenged. A bill due on 1st October was paid on 1st Feb. Interest was not paid. Is interest to be provided till 31st March? Interest till when? From 1st Feb or 31st March? See now, first thing is, uh, most of the auditors, what they are not doing is, first thing is their basic responsibility is to identify that what are the MSME creditors. If the payment is not made within a period of 45 days, first thing is they are required to make a provisioning with regards to the same, that interest would be payable or there can be a future liability for this particular transactions, because no, currently no interest has been paid for the same. However, none of the auditor as of now is reporting or doing anything with relevance to the same. But in case if you want to provide the same, then what would happen? Let's say if payment is made before 31st March, then in that case payment would be allowed, but whatever interest would have been charged, that would be disallowed, and interest would be till the date of actual payment. PPT would be shared. Which deduction is with relevance to the purchases that you would have booked for that particular vendors. 22V. So see, this interest would be in the nature of penalty itself, so it would be disallowed. 44 AD, will this clause be applicable? So for 44 AD, see, as of now, what it is mentioned that notwithstanding anything under section 28 to 43C that has been mentioned in 44 AD. And when discussing about 43B, what is mentioned is notwithstanding anything contained in any other law, in any other section. So prima facie, it seems that it is not applicable to 43B. However, there are some experts who are even of the view that department may take a stand that it may be applicable. But as of now, it is on the apparent reading. It seems that it is not applicable for 44 AD for presumptive taxation, because it is specifically mentioned that 28 to 43C won't be covered. If payment to registered micro trader is after due date is allowed under 43B. So see, basically it won't be allowed. If it is done in well within the financial year, then it can be allowed. So again, for trader, there is no clarity, but taking a conservative approach recommended that you pay within the due date. how to adjust advance against the invoice dated subsequent to the advance payment. So at the time of booking of payment entries, you need to select advance under the reference, and suppose that when you are booking the invoice in the against reference screen, the reference of the advance would be available. So while booking the, let's say, sales invoice, if you have received any advance for the same, when you click on the against reference tab, that particular advance would be displayed by itself. So through that, you could adjust the same in Tally. Whether Tally 4.0 is coming up with few features of reporting MSME transactions, both income tax and ROC. Uh, See, Tally is working on updates continuously. For this, I would say the team Tally would update you on the same. Should we enable interest calculation in vendor master for small? Yes, so that you get a proper reporting of the same, whether to provide for the same or not. That would depend on your professional skepticism. So based on the same, you could comment in the audit report for the same. In case of change in MSME classification of vendor, making changes in the group vendor or master will result in the change since the beginning of the company, and if it's not split. So see, basically just got your question that, let's say if you would have already grouped and it's a continuous data for several years, then in that particular case, if the grouping changes, then if we do the same, then the original grouping might be changed in the previous financial year. So one of the option is to split, and in case if the data split option is not available, what you could do is you could reach with any of the Tally developer. He may just provide with one particular field in the master itself, considering the effective date and other concepts. So through that, it would be more viable rather than using the grouping feature. If you want much accuracy to that extent and you are not going to split your data, instead of using filter option, can't we just select the date for which we need the overdue report? See, overdue report is on the reporting date. So let's say if you are looking at the overdue report as on date, it is the overdue from day one till date, whatever were outstanding. So even if you provide with a particular date, it is the total outstanding till that date. So it is required that we just provide with the filter for the same. If suppose in a particular year Mr. X was in medium, but in the next year the same is in small, then what to do? So in that particular case, from next year, this particular provision would be applicable. In the initial year, it won't be applicable. And discussing about the grouping in Tally, one of the option is you would just split the data to have the clear cut grouping. And if you are not splitting the data, then I would suggest that you take the help of any of the Tally developer. He may just provide you with a specific user defined field for the same, along with the concept of the effective dates. If suppose in a particular year Mr. X was in medium, but in next year the same is small, this is already discussed. Is this March disallowed in 24, 25 or in 23, 24? Is this March? So see, basically if payment of 23, 24 is not made, then while filing the return of 23, 24, it would be disallowed. And once it is disallowed in 23, 24, let's say if the payment is made in 24, 25, then in that case it would be allowed in 24, 25. So it is a sort of timing difference for the purpose of taxation that you could consider. And even I would say it would even have an impact on the deferred tax. Is there any provision to filter for SME party transaction in the bills payable report? So yes, you could just select with the group that we discussed, that you could have the group of MSME and you could just select that group so that you would be having the outstanding for that particular MSME transactions only. Kindly explain how to disable on account once again. So you could just go in this particular company screen. There it is specifically the user roles that have been provided. So when you click on the user roles, when you click on any of the user, then in that particular, there's an option here, exclude on account from bill allocation. Once you set the same to yes for that particular user, on account would be disabled. So if you want to disable for everyone, go and do this activity for every of the user. And if for a particular person, you can just go for that particular person. Okay, then what rate of interest to be applied for delayed payments? It is 3 times the rate notified by RBI. In case client falls under 22 to 43 will not be applicable. So is this so see, ideally it is not applicable in case of 44 AD. Some experts are of the view that it may be applicable, but that is too rigorous and a harsh call, I would say. Ideally in current scenario it is not applicable based on the bare interpretation. from accounting, reporting, and compliance perspective, TallyPrime is suggestible, or should we suggest to Tally Edit Law? So I would suggest that, see, from better internal control perspective, go with the TallyPrime edit log only, so that you have an entire trail as to what all updations were made by which particular user at what particular spot of time. So you would have a clear cut trail, even though the same is applicable whether you are company or not. Considering the internal control perspective, it is recommended to have TallyPrime edit log. This section applicable to assessee who opted for presumptive, so not applicable. What declaration could be taken for new vendors onboarding? So there are various declarations. One is from income tax perspective, that is with relevance to 194Q. Then there is section 206C1H. Then there is a TDS applicability on higher rates. Apart from that, there is a declaration for MSME. There is a declaration for e-invoicing. Even from GST perspective, it is mandatory that if the particular, to any particular person, e-invoice is applicable, then he has provided you with a valid invoice only. Else, if there is a normal invoice, then your ITC would be challenged. So all those declarations are required to be taken mandatorily. Formats, I suppose, if you could approach me, or I would share with the Tally team, you could approach them, they may provide you further.
Yeah, they can write to support team
Yeah.
and we'll share the data.
Overdue payable report shows only outstanding payable, but how to generate the report for those payments which were made but exceeding 45 days, 15 days? So see, in that particular case, overdue report, what should be the ideal practice as of now? You could check the overdue report as on 31st March 24 itself. So whatever were the previous outstandings that are specifically required to be disallowed. But when considering the scenario for the month of Feb and March, which may have been paid in the month of April or May, for that you may be required to check the ledgers for those transactions. If the client falls under 44AD, that has been discussed. Is the registration of MSME is required to determine the creditors of creditor? That has also been discussed. If creditor is not registered, that's discussed. MSME number in supplier master. So see, as of now, that option is not there. However, what you could do is, if you just want to maintain the same, mention the same in the alias or any other thing as of now, if you want. Or you could even get the same customized to any of the tele developers. If the payment is made before the due date of filing of ITR, no, it won't be allowed. Already discussed. Whether this is applicable to non-revenue creditors. So what are non-revenue creditors? If you could just elaborate on the same. See, whatever would hit on your PNL. So for that it is applicable. For non-revenue, if you are considering for the perspective of fixed asset, that I already discussed, there is no clarity as of now. However, in the worst scenario, if you consider the depreciation for the same may be challenged for that particular financial year, but there is no clarity as of now for the same. Is TDS not deductible on audit? That has already been discussed. Whether MSME certificate is must or declaration of vendor is enough. So it is required you do have a valid MSME certificate. Say, because what happens, MSME certificate would be a part of the declaration. So when you ask your vendor to provide you with a declaration, MSME certificate would form an attachment to that declaration. Because at the time of assessment, department is going to ask you that what all documents or what all supporting you have. Else, declaration you can take after 4 years, signing by yourself also people may provide. So that is not a valid proof. So I have a clear cut data for the same and documentation with relevance to the same. Creditor registered under MSME in March 24. So whether the previous invoice will also be considered. So see, I would say yes, because if it has been registered as on the reporting date, it is a registered MSME. So on a conservative approach, yes, but that could be challenged, I would say. If the payment is made after due date, deduction will be available. Yes, deduction would be available in the next financial year. In the current, it won't be available. From accounting, reporting, and compliance perspective, TallyPrime. Just a minute, I just skipped that question. TallyPrime is suggestible, or should we suggest Tally Edit Log? So again, as discussed, I would suggest personally Edit Log considering the internal control perspective. Can we see the first slide again? I would just share with the slide. Provisioning for expenses. So provisioning like that also is not going to be allowed. If at the time of purchase the vendor was not registered but now registered MSME. So consider on a conservative approach, consider the scenario as on the reporting date. If suppose in a per Mr. X was in medium, but in the next year that has already been discussed. So when he turns into the small enterprise, from that year it would be applicable. If the payment is made after the due date, deduction, yes, deduction would be available. One point I would like to highlight is, see, when discussing about the updation of the MSME registration, generally, see, users are not required to manually update the same on each financial year. Based on the ITR you file, based on the turnover and the block of asset, it gets automatically updated. So it is possible that for financial year 23-24, you file your ITR in the month of September or October, and post that it gets updated in financial year 24-25 that you are a non-MSME. But that doesn't mean that post updation only you became a non-MSME. The threshold limit was crossed in the financial year 23-24 itself. So in that case, it is recommended that follow it from day one for 24-25 also. Okay, now again moving to the further.
Kunalji, I think we have covered most of which, and
Yeah, now I suppose there are most of the repeated questions that are.
yeah, so that is why I thought if as the time is almost up and you had a commitment, so we can actually conclude the session.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. And
Or you, if you just want to scroll down and see if anything new or that can be called out, just take a call, please. Sir, if you can just take the last question, please reply any master field in ledger and Sunday creditors report to identify the MSME vendor.
so see, this again, I already discussed that. See, as of now, there is no specific field that, like, let's say you have a field for GST number, PAN number. There is no specific field for MSME. Tally is working on the same. It may provide in the further release. However, till the time, what you could do is you could have the same in any of the field like alias or anything. If you want, you could mention the same there.
Okay, I think I should say hats off to you for speaking continuously in one breath and almost answered 100 plus questions. Thank you so much, Kunalji. And as you see, this is a topic and a lot of queries has been answered. So thanks to you for proposing this topic. And Kunalji has just mentioned his contact details. If you wish to contact him, please take these details. And Kunalji, about some format which people are repeatedly asking, could you just share with me? So as
Yeah,
in when the support team gets a request, we'll be forwarding them.
yeah, I would just share with the same.
Thank you so much. We will now conclude the session.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.